A single arrow from a Welsh longbow could punch through a knight's armor at 200 yards. Yet the wood for that bow had been aging in a bowyer's workshop for over a decade. What secret techniques allowed medieval bowyers to transform ordinary yew trees into weapons that could decide the fate of kingdoms? And why did some bowyers' workshops produce legendary bows while others created weapons that snapped on the first draw? Medieval longbows weren't just hunting tools or simple weapons. They were precision instruments that required years of preparation, months of careful crafting, and techniques so closely guarded that master bowyers took their secrets to the grave. A longbow that could drive an arrow through mail, at edge and core, began its life as a carefully selected yew stave, seasoned according to methods passed down through generations of guild craftsmen. But the difference between a bow that lasted decades and one that failed catastrophically lay in tricks so subtle that even experienced woodworkers couldn't detect them. The bowyer's workshop stood apart from other medieval craft spaces, recognizable by the rows of wooden staves leaning against every wall in various stages of preparation. These weren't random pieces of wood, but carefully selected specimens that represented years of accumulated knowledge about wood selection, seasoning, and the mysterious properties that separated exceptional bow wood from ordinary timber. The air inside carried the scent of aged yew, linseed oil, and the peculiar smell of horn glue that bowyers used for their most demanding work. Unlike other medieval workshops that buzzed with constant activity, the buyer's domain operated on a different timeline. Apprentices might spend months learning nothing but how to identify proper yew wood, while journeymen practiced shaping techniques on practice staves before being trusted with valuable aged timber. Master buyers moved deliberately through their work, understanding that haste in bow-making led to weapons that failed when lives depended on them. The workshop itself reflected this patience, with dedicated spaces for different stages of the lengthy bow-making process. The most striking feature of any bowyer's workshop was the seasoning area, where hundreds of yew staves stood in careful arrangements that maximized air circulation while protecting the wood from direct sunlight and moisture. These staves represented the bowyer's most valuable inventory, some having aged for 15 years or more before being considered ready for use. Master bowyers could judge the readiness of seasoned wood by subtle changes in color, weight, and the sound it made when tapped with a fingernail. The Bowyers Guild maintained stricter control over their craft than almost any other medieval trade organization, and for good reason. A poorly made bow could kill its user as easily as its target, and military contracts for thousands of longbows meant that failures could affect entire armies. Guild regulations specified not just the techniques for bow construction, but the sources of acceptable wood, the minimum aging periods for different types of staves, and the testing procedures that determined whether finished bows met military standards. Apprenticeship in the Bowyers Guild lasted longer than most other crafts, typically 7 to 10 years, because the knowledge required went far beyond simple woodworking. Apprentices had to learn forestry, understanding which trees and which locations produced the best bow wood and how environmental factors affected wood quality. They studied wood anatomy at a level that approached modern forestry science, learning to read the grain patterns and growth rings that indicated superior bow material. Master bowyers guarded their most valuable techniques through a system of trade secrets that were revealed only to proven apprentices who had demonstrated both skill and absolute loyalty to guild standards. These secrets included specialized finishing techniques, the formulas for horn glows and protective coatings, and most importantly, the subtle modifications that could turn a good bow into an exceptional weapon. Guild bylaws included severe penalties for revealing trade secrets to outsiders, including permanent expulsion and financial ruin for violators. The selection of yew wood for longbow construction required expertise that bordered on the mystical. Not every yew tree could produce bow-quality wood, and even trees that appeared perfect might contain fatal flaws that wouldn't become apparent until the bow was nearly completed. Master bowyers developed techniques for identifying the best trees that went far beyond simple visual inspection, using methods passed down through generations of guild teaching. The ideal yew tree for bow making had to meet dozens of specific criteria. It needed to have grown slowly in challenging conditions that created dense, even grain patterns. Trees that had grown too quickly produced wood that was weak and unreliable, while those that had struggled too much might have compression damage that would cause bows to fail under stress. The tree had to be perfectly straight for at least 6 feet, with minimal branches or knots that could create weak points in the finished bow. But selecting the right tree was only the beginning. The timing of harvest was crucial, with experienced bowyers preferring wood cut during specific months when the sap was lowest and the wood's moisture content was most stable. Even the weather during harvesting mattered, as wood cut during rainy periods might develop problems during seasoning that wouldn't become apparent for years. Master bowyers maintained relationships with foresters and landowners across wide regions, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles to examine trees that had been reported as potential bow wood. The most closely guarded secret in yew selection involved reading the relationship between heartwood and sapwood in each tree. The best longbows utilized both the compression-resistant heartwood on the belly of the bow and the tension-resistant sapwood on the back, but achieving the perfect balance between these two different wood types required knowledge that took decades to master. Bowyers developed techniques for identifying trees where the heartwood-sapwood transition would produce the strongest possible bows. Once suitable yew wood was selected and harvested, the seasoning process began a transformation that could take up to 15 years to complete. This wasn't simply a matter of letting wood dry, but a carefully controlled aging process that improved the wood's mechanical properties, while eliminating the internal stresses that could cause finished bows to fail catastrophically. The seasoning process began with careful splitting of yew logs into rough staves, each one inspected for defects and sorted according to quality grades. The best staves were reserved for military longbows, while lesser grades might become hunting bows or practice weapons. Each stave was marked with information about its origin, harvest date, and quality assessment, creating a tracking system that allowed bowyers to monitor the seasoning process over many years. The physical arrangement of seasoning staves in the workshop was based on principles that modern wood science has validated, but medieval bowyers discovered through centuries of trial and error. Staves were positioned to allow maximum air circulation while preventing rapid moisture loss that could cause checking and splitting. They were rotated regularly to ensure even seasoning and protected from temperature extremes that could cause internal damage. But the real secret of proper seasoning lay in understanding how different environmental conditions affected the wood's internal structure. Master bowyers learned to read subtle signs of proper seasoning that weren't visible to untrained eyes. They could judge moisture content by the feel of the wood, identify internal stress patterns by examining how staves moved during handling, and predict which pieces would ultimately produce the strongest bows based on characteristics that developed only after years of controlled aging. The actual construction of a medieval longbow required techniques that pushed woodworking to its absolute limits. Unlike furniture or building construction, where minor imperfections might be cosmetic problems, bow-making demanded precision that approached modern engineering tolerances. A difference of a few thousandths of an inch in thickness could mean the difference between a bow that shot accurately for decades and one that broke on its first use. The process began with selecting a seasoned stave that showed perfect grain alignment and no hidden defects. Master bowyers used techniques for detecting internal flaws that relied on subtle visual cues, sound resonance tests, and even the way the wood felt under specialized tools. They could identify compression damage, hidden knots, and grain irregularities that would compromise the finished bow's performance. Shaping the bow required tools and techniques that were specialized for this single purpose. Bowyers used draw knives, spoke shaves, and scrapers that were custom-made for specific aspects of bow construction. The most critical work was done with tools so sharp they could slice paper, allowing the bowyer to remove wood in shavings thinner than modern veneer. The skill required to achieve perfectly smooth curves and precise thickness variations, using only hand tools, represented the pinnacle of medieval woodworking expertise. The mathematical principles underlying longbow design weren't formally understood in medieval times, but master bowyers had developed empirical methods that achieved the same results as modern engineering calculations. They knew exactly how to taper the bow from center to tips to achieve optimal energy storage and release, how to shape the cross-section for maximum strength with minimum weight, and how to balance the stresses between heartwood and sapwood to prevent failure under repeated use. The tillering process, where the bow was gradually brought to full draw weight while maintaining perfect balance and smoothness, required weeks of careful adjustment. Master bowyers used specialized tillering trees and measuring devices to ensure that both limbs of the bow bent in perfectly matched curves. They could detect imbalances measured in fractions of inches and correct them through precise removal of tiny amounts of wood from exactly the right locations. The social and military importance of longbows in medieval warfare created unique pressures on bowyers that didn't affect other crafts. Military contracts for hundreds or thousands of bows had to be completed on tight schedules, yet maintaining quality standards was literally a matter of life and death for the soldiers who would use these weapons. This tension between quantity and quality drove innovations in workshop organization and production techniques that allowed skilled bowyers to maintain standards while meeting military demands. Royal buyers, those privileged craftsmen who worked directly for kings and military leaders, occupied positions of unusual importance in medieval society. They were often exempt from local taxes and guild regulations, allowed to travel freely to source the best materials, and granted access to seasoned wood reserves that were off-limits to civilian buyers. In return, they were held to standards that exceeded even normal guild requirements, with their bows subjected to testing procedures that would destroy weapons that didn't meet specifications. The economics of longbow production created a unique market structure where the most expensive component was time rather than materials. A master bower might have thousands of pounds worth of seasoned yew wood in his workshop, but the real value lay in the years of seasoning time and the accumulated knowledge required to transform that wood into reliable weapons. This created a business model where successful bowers built their wealth through patient accumulation of seasoned stock and the reputation for quality that commanded premium prices. The regional variations in longbow design reflected different military traditions and environmental conditions, but also the closely guarded techniques that master bowyers developed and passed down through their workshop lineages. Welsh bowyers were renowned for producing the most powerful longbows, using techniques that maximized the draw weight while maintaining reliability. English military bowyers focused on standardization and rapid production methods that could supply large armies with consistent weapons. Continental bowyers often specialized in shorter, more maneuverable bows suited to different tactical applications. Medieval quality control for military longbows involved testing procedures that were far more rigorous than those applied to most other manufactured goods. Finished bows had to pass strength tests that involved drawing them to their full weight hundreds of times, accuracy tests using standardized arrows and targets, and durability tests that simulated the conditions of extended military campaigns. The testing process often destroyed a significant percentage of finished bows, but this waste was accepted as necessary to ensure that weapons reaching military units would perform reliably under combat conditions. Master bowyers developed techniques for predicting which bows would pass these tests, but even experienced craftsmen sometimes produced weapons that appeared perfect, but failed during final inspection. The most demanding tests involved shooting bows until they failed, providing data about the expected lifespan of weapons under various conditions. This information was used to establish replacement schedules for military units and to refine construction techniques that would extend bow life. The systematic approach to quality control developed by medieval bowyers established precedents for military equipment testing that influenced weapons procurement for centuries. The finishing techniques applied to completed longbows involved trade secrets that were among the most closely guarded in medieval crafts. These treatments didn't just improve the appearance of finished weapons, but actually enhanced their performance and durability in ways that could mean the difference between success and failure in combat situations. The selection and application of protective finishes required knowledge of chemistry that was remarkably advanced for medieval times. Master buyers understood how different oils and waxes interacted with yew wood, how environmental conditions affected these treatments, and how to create finishes that would protect bows from moisture while not interfering with their mechanical properties. Some finishing formulas were guild secrets passed down through generations, while others were developed by individual craftsmen and never shared outside their own workshops. The stringing and initial setup of completed longbows required techniques that were as demanding as the construction process itself. The bowstrings had to be made from materials and using methods that matched the performance characteristics of the bow, and the initial stringing process had to be done in ways that wouldn't damage the weapon or create performance problems that might not become apparent until the bow had been in use for months or years. The knowledge and techniques developed in medieval bowyers' workshops represented one of the highest achievements of pre-industrial craftsmanship. The principles these artisans mastered through centuries of trial and refinement were so sound that many remain valid today, incorporated into modern archery equipment and sporting goods manufacturing. The systematic approaches they developed for material selection, quality control, and performance testing established precedents that influenced manufacturing practices far beyond weapons production. The guild system that controlled medieval bowmaking also created educational and professional standards that evolved into modern apprenticeship programs and technical training systems. The emphasis on long-term skill development, careful mentorship, and gradual progression through levels of responsibility became models for professional development in many fields. Understanding what tricks medieval buyers used to make deadly accurate longbows reveals a world where the highest levels of craftsmanship were applied to creating weapons that could determine the fate of kingdoms. These artisans developed solutions to complex engineering problems using empirical methods that achieved results comparable to modern scientific approaches. Their workshops were places where ancient knowledge was continuously refined, where apprentices learned skills that would serve them throughout their careers, and where the balance between individual creativity and standardized quality was carefully maintained. The precision and reliability of medieval longbows represented achievements that weren't surpassed until the industrial age brought mechanized manufacturing and modern materials science. The bows that helped win battles at Crécy and Agincourt were products of craftsmanship traditions that had been refined over generations, using techniques so sophisticated that many weren't fully understood until modern engineering analysis revealed the principles underlying their success. The next time you see an archer draw a bow, remember the medieval buyers who first mastered the art of transforming wood into precision weapons. They worked without power tools, without scientific understanding of materials' properties, without even standardized measurement systems, yet they created weapons so effective that their basic design remained unchanged for centuries. Their legacy lives on, not just in modern archery equipment, but in the fundamental understanding that true craftsmanship requires patience, precision, and deep respect for the materials and techniques that make excellence possible. If you enjoy the hidden sides of medieval life, hit subscribe and give this video a like.